I thought marriage meant sacrifice. It meant working extra shifts. It meant moving across oceans. It meant trusting that the person you chose would protect what you built together. I was wrong. The text came on a Thursday afternoon. 3 words. I want a divorce. No call. No conversation. No warning. I was 3,000 miles away, working abroad to help secure our future. And when I checked our joint account, $0. He had taken everything. Savings, emergency funds, even the account we opened for our future home. I didn't have enough money for a cab, let alone a plane ticket home. I didn't even know where home was anymore. But standing there, in a country where no one knew my name, I realized something. He didn't leave me with nothing. He left me with freedom. And I was about to learn just how much I could build with that. I used to believe that hard work could fix anything. It was the mantra I grew up with. The thing my parents told me when grades slipped or bills piled up. Work harder. Push through. Make it happen. So when James and I got married, I applied the same logic. We loved each other. We had dreams. But we also had debt, student loans, medical bills, rent payments that swallowed half our income. Love would be the foundation. Hard work would be the walls. And together, I thought, we could build something unshakable. We met in college. He was studying finance. I was chasing international business, fueled by a stubborn desire to see the world beyond my small hometown. He was charming, funny in a way that wasn't performative. And when he smiled at me from across the library table that first day, it felt inevitable. We got married young, right after graduation. While most of our friends were still figuring out how to do taxes, we were signing a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like old carpet and new beginnings. I didn't mind the struggle. In fact, I loved it. Because it was ours. Every ramen dinner. Every secondhand couch. Every weekend spent budgeting at the kitchen table. It was messy and hard and hopeful. And it felt like we were building something real. When I got offered a position abroad, it wasn't a glamorous opportunity. It was an operations job for a mid-sized company expanding into Europe. Decent salary, grueling hours, unstable benefits. But it paid better than anything I could find locally. And we needed it. James had just lost his first post-grad job. Layoffs. Nothing he could control. But it shook him. Made him retreat into himself in ways I didn't fully understand yet. We agreed I would take the job. The plan was simple. 1 year, maybe 2. Save aggressively. Pay down debt. Build a cushion. Come back stronger. It wasn't forever. Just a season. A necessary sacrifice. At least, that's what we told ourselves. The first goodbye at the airport was brutal. James hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. "You're doing this for us," he whispered into my hair. I believed him. I carried that belief like armor during those first months overseas. Through the 14-hour workdays. Through the endless emails. Through the aching loneliness of coming home to an empty apartment in a foreign city where no one knew my name. I told myself it was worth it. For us. Always for us. We called almost every night. Texted through time zones. Sent each other stupid memes and updates on what the cat was doing. I learned to measure my days by the green next to his name. He didn't say much about what he was doing. Mostly staying home. Applying for jobs. Working part-time gigs when he could find them. I didn't push. I figured he was adjusting. And I was too busy working to examine the silences too closely. Months blurred into seasons. The distance hardened into routine. I came home twice a year. Quick trips. Jet-lagged weekends filled with desperate attempts to cram months of living into 48 hours. We would fight sometimes. About little things. "Why didn't you tell me about the bill that was late? Why didn't you call me back yesterday?" Stupid things. Things that weren't really about what they seemed. But we always made up. Because that's what love does. Or so I thought. When my company offered to extend my contract for another year, I hesitated. James said you should do it. You're doing amazing things. I'll be fine here. I believed him. Again. So I signed. Another 12 months. Another round of sacrifices, filed under the same header, for us. I didn't notice the small changes at first. How he stopped asking when I was coming home. How our calls grew shorter, less frequent. How the texts became more obligatory than excited. I wrote it off as stress, fatigue, life. Because if I let myself believe it was something more, I didn't know how I would survive it. That fall, I flew home for Thanksgiving. A surprise trip. I wanted to show him I was still invested. Still trying. When I walked through the door, he looked stunned. Happy, but stiff. Like he didn't quite know what to do with me. We had dinner with his family. Took a few grainy photos. Laughed over old inside jokes. From the outside, everything looked normal. But I felt the undercurrent. The spaces where conversations used to fill. The weight behind his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Still, I told myself it was just the distance. That once I was home for good, we would fix it. Everything was fixable if you worked hard enough. Right? Back in Europe, I threw myself into the final stretch of my contract. Longer hours. Bigger deals. More responsibility. Every paycheck felt like a brick in the future we were building. Our bank account reflected it too. I checked it often. Not out of mistrust. Out of pride. We were finally getting ahead. The debt was shrinking. The savings were growing. The dream of a down payment. A real home. Vacations that didn't require 3 side hustles to afford. It was all within reach. I pictured us opening that door together. Hand in hand. Everything we had waited for. Everything we had sacrificed for. I didn't know the door would slam in my face before I even touched it. I didn't notice the last warning signs until it was too late. Maybe because I didn't want to. Maybe because when you invest so much into a future, you refuse to believe it could collapse without warning. He was quieter than usual that week. Our texts shorter. My calls went unanswered more often. But I was busy too. Another product launch. Another endless week of back-to-back meetings. I told myself we were just tired. That real relationships don't always feel like fairy tales. That hard work now would mean peace later. On Thursday afternoon, I stepped out of a meeting and checked my phone. A single new message. It wasn't long. Just 3 words. I want a divorce. I stared at the screen for a full minute, convinced I had misread it. Convinced it was some kind of awful joke. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I texted back. No response. I called again. Nothing. The office noise around me blurred. I walked outside, the late autumn air sharp against my face, and tried to breathe. Divorce. No conversation. No warning. Just a text. Thousands of miles from home, from family, from anything that felt stable. I pulled up our banking app, hands trembling. Logged into our joint account. Balance. $0. I refreshed the page. Again. And again. Same result. He had cleaned out everything. Our savings. Our emergency fund. The deposit we had planned for a house. Gone. I checked our credit cards. Maxed out. I sat down on the curb outside the office, the world spinning a little too fast. I didn't have enough money for a cab ride back to my rented flat, let alone a plane ticket home. I didn't know what to do. Who to call. What words would even come out of my mouth if I tried. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. Everything we built, every dollar we scraped together, every late night and early morning, wiped away with a single swipe. I sat there until the sun went down, my work badge still hanging from my neck, the email notifications piling up on my phone, the city moving on around me like nothing had happened. But something had. My marriage was over. My savings were gone. My foundation had crumbled. And yet, somewhere deep under the wreckage, something small and stubborn remained. Not hope. Not yet. But something that whispered, "You're still here." You're still breathing. And if you can survive this moment, you can survive anything. I stood up, wiped my hands on my skirt, started walking back to my flat, one step at a time. Because if there was nothing left to lose, there was nothing left to be afraid of either. I woke up the next morning and for a second I forgot. I lay there staring at the cracked ceiling of the cheap flat I was renting, thinking about meetings and to-do lists and groceries, before the memory hit like a wave. Divorce. No money. No way home. I checked my phone out of habit. No new messages. No missed calls. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. I had 20 euros left in my wallet. Enough for a few groceries. Maybe a bus ride across town. Definitely not enough for an international flight. I thought about calling my parents, but the shame was louder than the loneliness. I didn't want to hear the heartbreak in my mother's voice. I didn't want to explain how I had built a life with someone who could discard me so easily. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I got up. I got dressed. I went to work. Nobody at the office knew. They smiled at me, asked about my weekend plans, looped me into meetings. I smiled back, took notes, answered emails. My body moved like normal, but inside everything felt detached, like I was floating slightly above my own life, watching it from a distance. Lunch hour came, and I sat outside alone with a sandwich I couldn't taste. I opened a new spreadsheet and started listing options. Emergency loans, cheap flights, local shelters. None of it seemed real. I wasn't supposed to be here. I had a career, a husband, a future. Not anymore. By the third day, the panic dulled into something else. Not acceptance, just endurance. I learned how to stretch a meal across 2 days. I learned which supermarkets marked down their food in the evenings. I learned how to walk to work instead of paying for the bus. Survival. One tiny adjustment at a time. A coworker asked if I was okay. I lied. Of course I lied. Because what could I say? That my life had fallen apart in a foreign country, and I didn't even have the dignity of falling apart loudly? That I was crumbling so quietly no one could hear it? On Friday night, I sat in the laundromat next to my building, watching the clothes spin, feeling more lost than I ever had in my life. My phone buzzed. A notification from the airline. A sale on one-way tickets. Still more than I could afford, but closer. Maybe if I skipped meals for a week. Maybe if I pawned my laptop. Maybe if I found a second job cleaning offices after hours. The thought exhausted me. But it also sharpened something inside me. A small, cold realization. No one was coming to save me. Not James. Not my family. Not my employer. No one. If I wanted a way out, I would have to carve it with my own hands. I turned off my phone, folded my clothes, walked back to my flat. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start asking the questions I had been too afraid to ask. Where can I find temporary work? How much does it cost to sleep in a hostel? Who can I trust, even a little? Because I wasn't going to let him end my story with a text. Not even close. I spent the weekend mapping out a plan. Not a good plan. Not a perfect plan. Just something to keep me moving forward. I listed every possible source of income one could think of. Tutoring English. Babysitting. Freelance administrative work. Temp agencies. I Googled shelters and cheap hostels just in case my lease ran out before I could stabilize. I emailed every contact I had ever met abroad, asking if they knew anyone hiring. I told myself I wasn't begging. I was networking. Monday morning came fast and cold. I packed a peanut butter sandwich into a plastic bag and set out early. Before work, I stopped at 3 local businesses and asked if they needed part-time help. 2 said no. 1 said maybe. I didn't let it discourage me. I couldn't afford to. Every no brought me closer to the yes I needed. At the office, I did my job. I answered emails. I attended meetings. I smiled when people passed my desk. I wondered if they could tell I was wearing the same pants for the 3rd day in a row because I couldn't afford to run the washing machine yet. I wondered if they noticed how hollow my eyes looked. After work, I walked instead of taking the tram. Saved the fare. Took an extra 40 minutes, but it was 40 minutes to think, to breathe, to remind myself that I was still here, still moving. I found a small cafe that needed help washing dishes 2 nights a week. Cash under the table. I took it without hesitation. Humbling? Maybe. Necessary? Absolutely. By the end of the first week, I had enough money for groceries and bus fare. Not enough for a plane ticket home, but enough to eat. Enough to keep showing up. Each tiny victory felt enormous. A full meal, a hot shower, an email from a freelance site offering me a data entry gig. 10 euros here, 20 euros there. It added up. The second weekend, I visited a community center that offered free financial counseling for immigrants and expats. I sat through the entire seminar, even though I understood only half of it. Afterwards, I cornered the speaker and asked for advice. He didn't solve my problems. No one could. But he pointed me toward a small grant program for displaced workers. Applications were competitive. Deadlines were tight. But I didn't care. I would fill out 50 applications if it meant I had a chance. At night, I stayed up writing cover letters, polishing my resume. Applying for anything and everything. No job too small. No task beneath me. Some days I still cried. In the bathroom at work. Walking home alone. Lying on the thin mattress in my flat, staring at the cracked ceiling. But the tears didn't stop me. I let them fall. Then I kept going. Survival wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some inspiring movie montage with swelling music. It was ugly and slow and humiliating. It was swallowing my pride day after day. It was holding on to the smallest slivers of hope like they were life rafts. But it was survival. And survival, I learned, was an act of rebellion. It meant he hadn't won. It meant I was still writing my story. It meant I still had a future, even if I had to build it from ashes. The third week after the text, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough. I woke up before my alarm, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt capable. Tired, bruised, stretched thin. But capable. I got dressed in the same worn jeans and sweater, packed my makeshift lunch, and headed out before sunrise. I checked my email while waiting for the bus, and there it was. A reply from one of the companies I had cold applied to. They needed temporary administrative help for a 6-month contract. Nothing glamorous. Basic data entry. Scheduling. Filing. But steady pay. Legal employment. A real stepping stone. I reread the email 3 times to make sure it was real. My hands shook as I typed out a reply accepting the interview. 2 days later, I sat in a borrowed blazer in a windowless office, trying to steady my breathing while answering questions in a language that still felt foreign in my mouth sometimes. The manager, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes but a kind smile, asked about my experience. I told her the truth. International business background, admin skills, strong work ethic. I didn't tell her about the divorce, about the 0 bank account, about the nights I fell asleep hungry. I didn't need pity. I needed a job. She nodded through my answers, jotted something down, and said, "We'll be in touch." I walked home not expecting anything. I had learned by now not to hope too loudly. But 3 days later, the offer came. 6-month contract. Modest salary. Enough to live. Enough to save. Enough to start again. I signed it without hesitation. My first paycheck felt like more than money. It felt like proof that I could survive, that I could build, that I didn't need to be anyone's wife or anyone's dependent to stand on my own. I found a better flat. Nothing fancy. Just clean, safe, with a lock I own the key to. I bought groceries without calculating every cent. I paid down the credit card debt I hadn't dared check in weeks. I opened a new bank account. Solo. No joint anything. Not ever again. I started walking taller, speaking louder, laughing again, sometimes without it catching in my throat. I made friends at work, small connections at first. Coffee breaks, shared complaints about printers, weekend walks in the park. It wasn't a life yet, but it was a beginning. Sometimes I still thought about him, about the life we were supposed to have, about the betrayal that burned hotter the longer I sat with it. But those thoughts didn't control me anymore. They didn't own me. They were just scars, not open wounds. One Friday night, sitting in my little kitchen with a cheap bottle of wine and a frozen pizza, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology. Not for closure. Not for a rescue. I had already saved myself. Quietly. Stubbornly. Completely. And the life I was building brick by painful brick was mine. No one could take it from me again. 6 months after the text, I stood in my new apartment and realized I didn't recognize my life anymore. Not because it was broken, but because it was mine. Entirely mine. I had a steady job, modest but enough. I had friends I met for coffee on weekends. I had my own bank account, my own routines, my own quiet peace. Some nights were still hard. Some mornings I still woke up bracing for the next blow. But mostly I felt steady. I felt strong. I felt free. I learned how to fix small things around the apartment without calling for help. I learned how to read contracts more carefully. I learned that loneliness isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's just space clearing for something better. I traveled to nearby towns on my days off, rode trains through the countryside, ate pastries in tiny cafes, smiled at strangers without fear. I stopped explaining my story to new people. I stopped apologizing for the space I took up. I stopped waiting for someone else to choose me. I chose myself. Every day. Quietly. Fiercely. One evening, sitting by the river with a journal on my lap, I wrote down a truth I had been circling for months, but never dared put into words until then. He didn't destroy me. He freed me. Freed me from a life that was smaller than I deserved. Freed me from loyalty that was never returned. Freed me from a future I had outgrown without even realizing it. The text he sent that day felt like an ending. But it wasn't. It was the beginning. And every step I took away from that old life brought me closer to the person I was always meant to become. Not a survivor. Not a victim. But a builder. A creator. The author of my own life. And I wasn't afraid anymore. Maybe survival doesn't look like a grand comeback. Maybe it just looks like waking up one more morning, standing up one more time, choosing yourself one more day. I didn't plan for the ending I got, but I chose the beginning that followed. And if you're listening to this, wondering if you can rebuild too, I'm here to tell you, you already are. Thank you for sharing this hour with me. If this story spoke to something inside you, stay a little longer. Subscribe. Come back for more. Because this is Life Stories. And here, your survival is just the start of your story.